Hello everybody and welcome back to my continuation of my book reading of Stephen King Elevation. It's been a while since I did a book reading and I really want to continue with it. So here we go, we're actually going to start at chapter 2 here with Holy Frijoly. Here we go. Instead of going home as he had intended, Scott walked to the town common to page through his new purchase and looked at the photos. He strolled along the other side of Main and saw what he now thought of as the Deirdre poster one more time. In the knit and yarn shop. Nowhere else. Mike had kept seeing they and those women, but he really doubted that. It was all about Macomb. She was the in-your-face half of the partnership. He thought Missy Donaldson would have been happy to keep it on the DL. That half of the partnership would have serious problems saying boo to Goose. But she came to see me, he thought, and she said a lot more than boo. That's her guts. Yes, and he had liked her for it. He put New England fixtures and furnishing on the park bench and began to jog up and down the steps of the bandstand. It wasn't exercise he craved, but just movement. I've got ants in my pants, he thought, not to mention bees in my knees, and it wasn't like climbing the steps, more like sprinting up them. He did it half a dozen times, then went back to his bench, interested to find he wasn't out of breath, and his pulse was only slightly elevated. He took out his phone and called Dr. Bob. The first thing Alice asked about was his weight. 204, as of this morning, Scott said. Listen, so it's continuing. Have you thought any more about getting serious and really digging into this? Because a loss of 40 pounds, give or take, is serious. I still have contacts at Mass General, and I don't think a total soup to nuts exam would cost you a dime. In fact, they might pay you. Bob, I feel fine. Better than fine, actually. The reason I called was to ask if you've eaten at Holy Frijoly yet. There was a pause while Alice digested this chance of subject. Then he said, The one your lesbian neighbors run? No, not yet. Scott frowned. You know what? There might be a little more to them than their sexual orientation. Just saying. Mellow out. Alice sounded slightly taken aback. I didn't mean to step on your corns. Okay, it's just... There was an incident at lunch, at Patsy's. What kind of incident? A little argument over them. Doesn't matter. Listen, Bob, how about a night out? Holy Frijoly. Dinner? I'll buy. When were you thinking? How about tonight? I can't tonight, but I could on Friday. Myra's going to spend the weekend at her sister's down in Manchester, and I'm a lousy cook. It's a date, Scott said. A mandate, Alice agreed. Next she'll be asking me to marry you out. That would be bigamy on your part, Scott said. And I will lead you not into temptation, just to do one thing for me. You make the reservation. Still sideways with them? Alice sounded amused. Wouldn't it be better to just give it a pass? There's a nice Italian place in Bridgeton. Nope. I've got my face fixed on for Mexican. Dr. Bob signed. I guess I can make the reservation, although if what I'm hearing about the place is true, I hardly think one will be necessary. Scott picked Alice up on Friday, because Dr. Bob no longer liked to drive at night. The ride down to the restaurant was short, but long enough for Bob to tell Scott the real reason he had wanted to put off their mandate until Friday. He didn't want to get into a squabble with Myra, who was on church and town committees, that had no love for the two women who ran the Rock's newest fine dining experience. You're kidding, Scott said. Unfortunately not. Myra's open-minded on most subjects, but when it comes to sexual politics, let's just see, she was raised a certain way. You might have argued, perhaps even bitterly, if I didn't believe shouting matches between husband and wife in old age are undignified. Will you tell her you visited the Rock's Mexican vegetarian den of iniquity? Iniquity, sorry. If she asks where I ate on Friday night, yes. Otherwise, I'll keep my mouth shut. As will you. As will I, Scott says. He pulled into one of the slant parking spaces. Here we are. Thanks for doing this with me, Bob. I'm hoping it will put things right. It did not. Deirdre was at the hostess stand, not wearing a dress tonight, but a white shirt and tapered black slacks that showcased those admirable legs. Dr. Bob entered ahead of Scott and she smiled at him, not the slightly superior one with the lips closed and the eyebrows raised, but a professionally welcoming one. Then she saw Scott and the smile went away. She gave him a cool appraisal with those green-gray eyes, as if he were a bug on a microscope slide, then dropped them and grabbed a couple of menus. Let me show you to your table. As she led them to it, Scott admired the decor. It wasn't enough to say McComb and Donaldson had taken pains. This looked like a labor of love. Mexican music. He thought the type they called the Llano, or Ranchera. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing this correctly. Played through the overhead speakers. The walls were soft yellow and the plaster had been roughed up to look like adobe. The scones were green glass cacti. Large wall hanging features a sun, a moon, 2 dancing monkeys, and a frog with golden eyes. The room was twice the size of Patsy's diner, and he saw only 5 couples and a single party of 4. Here we are, Deirdre said. I hope you enjoy your meal. I'm sure we will, Scott said. It's good to be here. I'm sort of hoping we can start over, Mr. McComb. Do you think that would be possible? She looked at him calmly, but without warmth. Gina will be right with you, and she'll tell you the specials. With that, she was gone. Dr. Bob seated himself and took out his napkin. 1 Pax, gently applied to the cheeks and brow. Beg your pardon? Treatment for frostbite? I believe you just took a cold blast directly to the face. Before Scott could reply, a waitress appeared. The only waitress, it seems. Like Deirdre McComb, she was dressed in black pants and a white shirt. Welcome to Holy Frijoly. Could I bring you gentlemen anything to drink? Scott asked for a Coke. Alice opted for a glass of the house wine, then put on his specs for a better look at the young woman. You're Gina Ruckelhaus, aren't you? You must be. Your mother was my PA when I still had my office downtown, back in the Jurassic era. You bear a strong resemblance to her. She smiled. I'm Gina Beckett now, but that's right. Very good to see you, Gina. Give my regards to your mom. I will. She's at Dartmouth Hickok right now. Over on the dark side, meaning the New Hampshire. I'll be right back to tell you about the specials. When she returned, she brought appetizers with her drinks, setting the place down almost reverently. The smell was to die for. What have we got here? Scott asked. Freshly fried green plantain chips and a salsa of garlic, cilantro, lime, and a little green chili. Compliments of the chef. She says it's more Cuban than Mexican, but she hopes that won't keep you from enjoying it. When Gina left, Dr. Bob leaned forward, smiling. Seems you had some success with the one in the kitchen at least. Maybe you're the favorite one. Gina could have whispered in Missy's ear that her mother used to labor in your medical sweatshop, although Scott knew better, or thought he did. Dr. Bob waggled his shaggy white eyebrows. Missy, huh? On the first name basis with her, are we? Come on, Doc, quit it. I will, if you promise not to call me Doc. I hate it. Makes me think of Milburn Stone. Who's that? Google it when you get home, my child. They ate well. The food was meatless, but terrific. Enchiladas with frioles and tortillas that had obviously not come from a supermarket package. As they ate, Scott told Alice about his little set twin patties and about the posters featuring Deirdre McComb, soon to be replaced by less controversial ones starring a flock of cartoon turkeys. She asked if Myra had been on that committee. No, that's one she missed. But I'm sure she would have approved the change. With that, he turned the conversation back to Scott's mysterious weight loss, and the more mysterious fact that he appeared not to have changed physically, and of course the most mysterious fact of all, whether he wore or carried that was supposed to weigh him down, didn't. A few more people came in, and the reason McComb was dressed like a waitress became clear. She was one at least tonight, maybe every night. The fact that she was doing double duty made the restaurant economical position even clearer. The corner cutting had begun. Gina asked them if they were wanting dessert. Both demurred. I couldn't eat another bite, but please tell Miss Donaldson it was superb, Scott said. Dr. Bob put two thumbs down up. He'll be so pleased, Gina said. I'll be back with your check. The restaurant was emptying rapidly, only a few couples left, sipping after dinner drinks. Deirdre was asking those departing how their meal had been and thanking them for coming. Big smiles, but no smiles for the two men at the table beneath the frog tapestry, not even a single look in their direction. It's as if we have the plague, Scott thought. And you're sure you feel fine? Dr. Bob asked, for perhaps the 10th time. No heartbeat? Arrhythmia? No dizzy spells? Excessive thirst? None of that, pretty much the opposite. Want to hear an interesting thing? He told Alice about jogging up and down the bandstand steps, almost bouncing up and down them, and how he had taken his pulse afterwards. Not resting pulse, but pretty damn low. Under 80. Also, I'm not a doctor, but I know how my body looks like, and there have been no wasting in the muscles. Not yet, anyway, Alice said. I don't think there's going to be. I think mass stays the same. Even though the weight that should go with mass is somehow disappearing, the idea is insane, Scott. Couldn't agree more, but there it is. The power of gravity has over me has definitely had been lessened. And who can be cheerful about that? Before Bob could reply, Gina came back with the slip for Scott to sign. He did so, adding a generous tip, and told her again how good everything had been. That's wonderful. Please come again, and tell your friends. She bent forward and lowered her voice. We really need the business. Deirdre McComb wasn't at the hostess stand when they went out. She was standing on the sidewalk at the foot of the steps and gazing towards the stoplight at the tin bridge. She turned to Alice and gave him a smile. I wonder if I could have a word with Mr. Carey in private. It won't take a minute. Of course, Scott. I'm going across the street to inspect the content of the bookshop window. Just give me a honk when you're ready to roll. Dr. Bob crossed the main street, deserted as it usually was by 8 o'clock. The town tucked in early, and Scott turned to Deirdre. Her smile was gone. He saw that she was angry. He had hoped to make things better by eating at Holy Frijoly, but instead he had made them worse. He didn't know why that should be, but it pretty clearly was. What's on your mind, Mr. Combe? If it's still the dogs, how could it be? When we now run them in the park, or try to at least. Their leashes are always getting tangled. You can run them on the view, he said. I told you that. It's just a matter of picking up their... Never mind the dogs. Those green-gray eyes were all but snapping off sparks. That subject is closed. What needs to be closed is your behavior. We don't need you standing up for us in the local grease pit and restarting a lot of talk that had just begun to die down. If you believe it's dying down, you haven't seen how few shop windows have your picture in them, Scott thought. What he said was, Patsy's in the farthest thing in the world from a grease pit. She may not serve your kind of food there, but it's clean. Clean or dirty, that's not the point. If standing up needs to be done, I'll do it. We don't need you to play Sir Galahad. For one thing, you're a little too old for that part. Your eyes flicker down his shirt front. For another, you're a little too overweight. When Scott's current condition, this jab entirely missed the mark. But he felt a certain sour amusement at her employment of it. She would have been infuriated to hear a man say some women was a little too old and a little too overweight to play the part of Guinevere. I hear you, he said. Point taken. She seemed momentarily disconcerted by the mildness of his reply, as she had swung out at an easy target and somehow missed entirely. Are we done, Mr. McComb? One other thing, I want you to stay away from my wife. So she knew he and Donaldson had talked, and now it was Scott's turn to hesitate. Had Missy told McComb that she had gone to Scott, or had she perhaps, in order to keep the peace, told McComb that Scott had come to her? If he asked, he might get her in trouble, and he didn't want to do that. He was no marriage expert, his own being a fine case in point. But he thought the problems with the restaurant were always putting the couple's relationship under enough strain. Alright, he said. Now, are we done? Yes. And as she said at the end of their first meeting, before closing the door in his face, good discussion. Excuse me. He watched her mount the steps, slim and quick, in her black pants and white shirt. He could see her running up and down the bandstand steps much faster than he could manage, even after dropping 40 pounds, and as light on her feet as a ballerina. That was it, Mike. Badalamenti had said. I can't wait to run with her. Not that I'll be running with her long. God had given her a beautiful body for running, and Scott wished to God she was enjoying it more. I guess that, behind the superior smile, Deirdre McComb wasn't enjoying much these days. Mr. McComb, she turned, waited. It really was a fine meal. No smile for this, superior or otherwise. Good. I suppose you already passed that on Missy, by way of Gina? But I'm happy to pass it on again. And now that you've been here and show yourself to be on the side of the politically correct angels, why don't you stick to Patsy's? I think we'll all be more comfortable that way. She went inside. Scott stood on the sidewalk for a moment, feeling... what? It was such a weird mix of emotions that he guessed it. There was no single word for it. Chastened? Yes. Slightly amused. Check. A bit pissed off, but most of all sad. He was a woman who didn't want an olive branch, and he had believed, naively it seemed, that everyone wanted one of those. Probably Dr. Bob's right, I'm still a child, he thought. Hell, I don't even know who Milburn Stone was. The street was too quiet for him to feel okay about even the short honk, so he went across the street and stood beside Alice at the window on the book nook. Get it straightened out? Dr. Bob asked. Not exactly. She told me to leave her wife alone. Dr. Bob turned to him. Then I suggest you do that. He drove Alice home, and mercifully Dr. Bob didn't spend any of the trip importunity Scott to check into Mass General, the Mayo, the Cleveland Clinic, or NASA. Instead, as he got out, he thanked Scott for an interesting evening and told him to stay in touch. Of course I will, Scott said. We're sort of in this together now. That being the case, I wonder if you come over perhaps Sunday? Myra won't be back and we could watch the Patriots upstairs, instead of in my poor excuse for a man cave. Also, I'd like to thank some measurements. I would like to take some measurements. Start keeping a record. Would you allow that much? Yes, to the football, no to the measurements, Scott said. At least for now, okay? I accept your decision, Dr. Bob said. That really was a fine meal. I didn't miss the meal at all. Neither did I, Scott said. But this wasn't precisely true. When he got home, he made himself a salami sandwich with brown mustard. Then he stripped and stepped on the bathroom scale. He had declined the measurement because he was sure Dr. Bob would also want a weigh-in each time he checked Scott's muscle density, and he had an intuition. Or perhaps it was some deep physical self-knowledge, which now proved to be correct. He had been a little over 201 that morning. Now, after a big dinner followed by a hefty snack, he was at 199. The process was speeding up. And with that, that was the end of chapter 2. Very short one, but really interesting. Yeah, I see how the story is evolving very smoothly. And I really like this book, the way it reads as well. So I hope you guys also enjoyed. Thank you very much for listening. And yeah, I'll catch you in the next one. Take care, enjoy your city. Bye bye.